Every Monday morning, millions of people wake up and obey. They check in. They report progress. They wait for approval. They follow the rules. Sound familiar? Now here's what most people don't realize. Your workplace might be running a 70-year-old control system designed to manage 900 million people. The same tactics. The same psychology. Just different words. But there's another way. One that's worked for 1,500 years. And it requires no surveillance, no KPIs, no performance reviews. Which system is your workplace using? Stay with me, because the answer determines whether you're building mastery or just following orders. Let's start with what forced discipline looks like in a modern office. You arrive at work. Before you begin, you check in. Report your status. Log your hours. Document your activities. Sound normal? It is. But here's where it gets interesting. This is the exact same structure Mao used in 1960s China. The work unit system. Every worker was monitored. Every action documented. Every deviation noted. The goal? Create a system where people govern themselves through fear of observation. Now, you might think modern workplaces are different. After all, your manager isn't a political commissar. Your performance review isn't a struggle session. But the psychology? Identical. Think about your last performance review. You sat across from someone who held power over your career. They listed what you did right, what you did wrong, what you need to improve. You nodded. You agreed to goals you didn't choose. You left feeling like you needed to prove yourself. That's external control. And here's what makes it so effective. It works immediately. Set a deadline, people meet it. Assign a task, it gets done. Create consequences, behavior changes. Mao understood this perfectly. In the work unit system, productivity was monitored daily. Output was measured constantly. Compliance was mandatory. And it produced results, at least in the short term. Modern workplaces use the same playbook. Daily stand-ups, weekly check-ins, monthly reviews, quarterly goals, annual evaluations. Every level of the system designed to maintain discipline from the outside. But here's the part nobody talks about. This system creates dependency, not mastery. Employees learn to wait for direction. They check with their manager before making decisions. They need approval to proceed. They measure success by whether their boss is satisfied. Consider the employee who works late only when the manager is watching, who hits targets only when reviews are approaching, who follows procedures only when being monitored. That's compliance, not commitment. So is your workplace using forced discipline? Ask yourself, would you maintain the same work ethic if nobody was watching? If there were no performance reviews, no manager check-ins, no consequences? If the answer is no, then your discipline is forced. And when the force disappears, when you quit, when you retire, when you go independent, the discipline might disappear too. Now imagine the opposite. What if your workplace operated on a completely different principle? What if discipline came from within? What if you set your own standards, chose your own goals, and measured your own progress? Sounds impossible in a modern company, right? But it's not. And some of the most successful professionals have figured this out. Heng teaches that true mastery cannot be given by a teacher, it must be claimed by the student. The same principle applies to work. In the Shaolin tradition, monks rise before dawn not because a master commands it, but because they've committed to their own development. They practice not to meet someone else's standards, but to exceed their own. No one tracks their hours. No one reviews their performance. No one sets their quarterly goals. They discipline themselves. Now here's where this gets fascinating. Some modern professionals have adopted this exact approach, even within traditional companies. They don't wait for their manager to set goals. They identify what mastery looks like in their field and pursue it voluntarily. They don't work hard because someone is watching. They work hard because they've chosen a standard for themselves. They don't need performance reviews to know if they're improving. They measure themselves against their own past performance, their own potential, their own vision of excellence. This is discipline from within. And here's what makes it so powerful. Consider the software engineer who codes not to hit sprint targets, but because they're genuinely obsessed with solving elegant problems. The writer who crafts articles not to meet a word count, but because they're committed to clarity and truth. The teacher who prepares lessons not for administrator approval, but because they've dedicated themselves to student growth. These professionals have internalized discipline. No one needs to manage them. No one needs to motivate them. No one needs to watch them.
Why?
Because they've chosen their own path. But here's the part that seems counterintuitive. This voluntary discipline is actually harder at first. There's no external structure pushing you forward. No manager demanding progress. No deadline forcing action. Just you and your commitment. And here's why most people quit within the first week. They realize they've never truly disciplined themselves. Ever. Many people fail here. They need the external pressure. They require the surveillance. They depend on the consequences. But those who succeed in building internal discipline, they become unstoppable. They wake up with purpose, tackle important work first, solve obstacles independently, and set higher standards than any manager would require. And here's what happens over time. The discipline strengthens. The voluntary commitment deepens. Because every choice to continue reinforces the neural pathways of self-governance. Every decision made independently builds the psychological muscle of autonomy. This is the Shaolin approach applied to modern work. Choose your discipline. Own your standards. Govern yourself. When the manager leaves, when the company changes, when you switch careers, the discipline remains. Because it was never dependent on external force. It's yours. Now let's compare these approaches directly, because the difference determines your entire career trajectory. So here's the experiment playing out in every workplace. Two approaches to discipline, same human psychology, completely different outcomes. One controls through management, KPIs, and consequences. The other develops through autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Here's a test that reveals everything. Imagine both approaches face a crisis. Here's a real test. A major deadline gets moved up by 2 weeks. The forced discipline workplace. Manager panics. Sends urgent emails. Demands weekend work. Monitors constantly. People comply, but resent it. The voluntary discipline workplace. Individuals assess the situation, choose their response, and act. Slower to mobilize at first, but once committed, relentless.
Why?
Because the commitment comes from within. Crisis or calm, watched or alone, the discipline persists. Now think about your own career for a moment. When you had a demanding boss, how hard did you work? Probably very hard. But what happened when that boss left? When the pressure dropped? When no one was watching as closely? Did your work ethic remain? Or did it drop to match the new reduced scrutiny? That's the test. External discipline fades when the external pressure fades. But when you've built internal discipline, when you work hard because you've chosen your own standards, that doesn't change when the boss changes. It doesn't fluctuate with company culture. It doesn't depend on who's watching. Look at career trajectories. The person who needed their manager to push them, where are they 10 years later? Often in the same role, still waiting for direction, still dependent on external structure. But the person who disciplined themselves, where are they? Usually leading, innovating, creating, because they learned to govern themselves. One builds employees. The other builds professionals. Now here's the scale of this difference. The forced discipline workplace creates compliance. People show up, hit targets, follow procedures. But it requires constant management, constant oversight, constant correction. The voluntary discipline approach creates mastery. People solve problems independently, exceed expectations voluntarily, improve constantly. It requires minimal oversight, minimal management, minimal control.
Why?
Because people have learned to lead themselves. So which creates lasting success? The evidence is clear. Companies built on control struggle when conditions change. When the top-down directives stop, when the strict management loosens, when the surveillance decreases, performance drops. But organizations that develop internal discipline in their people, they adapt. They innovate. They survive disruption. Because the discipline was never dependent on the system. It lives in the people. You tell me which one works. Throughout this series, we'll explore how forced versus chosen discipline plays out in every domain of life. In families, in schools, in relationships, in personal development. So here's your challenge. Think about your own work right now. Is your discipline forced or chosen? Do you work hard because someone is watching, or because you've set your own standards? Do you need external pressure to perform, or have you built internal drive? And most importantly, if your manager disappeared tomorrow, if the performance reviews stopped, if no one was tracking your metrics, would your discipline remain? If this question makes you uncomfortable, you're not alone. Most people realize their discipline is more external than they thought. But recognizing this is the first step toward changing it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you can't discipline yourself, someone else will discipline you. That's not motivation, that's reality. The only question is, do you want to be the one in control? If you're ready to explore the deepest patterns of human discipline and control, if you want to understand what truly creates lasting excellence, then join us. We're building something extraordinary here, a community that refuses easy answers and demands real understanding. Drop your honest experience in the comments. What percentage of your work discipline is forced versus chosen? Your voice matters in this conversation. And if you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about work, success, and self-mastery, hit subscribe. Because we're just getting started. Until we meet again, keep questioning, keep choosing, and keep growing. See you in the next one.